Okay, so we're going to be getting into our lesson on our Studio Project 3. So if anyone saw any of the messages that I sent out and you do have any cool spot animation videos that you think are interesting that we should check out, you can share them in the chat, or if you want to, you can also just post them on our in-class workboard. That way we can sort of share and check those out. But if you just want to drop them in chat, I can take a look at those and share them really quick as well. But while everyone is going through that, I will sort of bring up here just some examples of what you can potentially do for your final studio project. So this will be a project that will be based off around a brand of your choice, and you'll be creating your own sort of animated spot from 5 to 15 seconds. I do have all of these sort of specs laid out, but just so you can hear it sort of verbally. So this will be sort of basically your sort of final project for the class. Basically taking everything that you've learned so far in the class and sort of throwing it together into one sort of cohesive storytelling project about some brand. Now, what type of animation you can create, it can sort of pretty much be up to you in a sense. However you wish to sort of display the idea or the concept that you have around your brand. So up here, I have a number of different examples, and if you want to check these ones out, they are on the outline, so feel free to check these out on your own time as well. But all of these are sort of examples of what you could potentially do for this assignment. The ones that I have up here to begin with, these are all sort of mainly studio examples. So these are created by teams of people mainly, or small teams. Not all of them are sort of huge teams. And then I also have some of my own examples that we'll check out as well. So I'll just sort of jump into some of these here, just so you can see what I'm sort of talking about. Let me lower my background music here a little bit and hide that over there. So let's play this here. Hopefully the sound doesn't come in too loud to begin with. So some of you might be familiar with this brand. So a couple different pieces to that. So if you didn't catch on, that was for the brand Lyft. So ride sharing service, fully in sort of 3D. So that's more of a, I guess you could say, a semi-longer form type of one. But you could clearly tell what the brand is for and sort of what the idea that they're going for there. So that's more sort of literal there. Here I have sort of a shorter one. And this one is a lot simpler, but you should be able to sort of get the same sort of idea from it. So pretty quick one there, but from what I said before, 5 to 15 seconds, this one would totally fit in that sort of idea. Now, you don't always have to be super obvious about what the brand is. This one is pretty clear that it's about Legos and sort of Star Wars through sort of brand recognition, I guess you could say. So, of course, that sort of idea won't work for every sort of brand, but for this one, I think it works pretty well and it's pretty straightforward. So this one is really focusing on just one object, as opposed to multiple objects like we're in the other one. Here, I'll show you one that's a little bit more sort of VFX-y, but still based in sort of the 3D realm, of course. And this is one that I'll also show sort of a more involved breakdown on how they actually put this whole thing together. So obviously bringing something that's inanimate to life, bringing a character sort of in an interesting way. And there's a lot of work that went into producing that, which we will be going into in more detail later on as I show you the different steps that you'll be taking towards creating your own sort of spot here. Oh yeah, sure, I can show that one again. Yeah, so that's a cool one, I think. And they do a lot to show how they actually created that one. And of course, feel free to watch these again on the links on the outline. I'll show, I think, one more here before I show sort of the one that I showed in the email that I sent for this lesson here. So this is another one that I found more recently. I just like it mainly because it's the style that's going for is a little bit different, at least in terms of like recent work. So mainly wanted to show that just for another style. So very Spider-Verse like in terms of its stylistic there. So just to show that you don't have to do everything in sort of, sort of the clean sort of 3D space. It can sort of be, fun comic pop culture type of look, even if you are working in sort of the 3D space as well. So nothing to say that you have to work in one particular style. And the last one that I want to show here, there are a ton more options here that you can check out, but just to show you one more, and this is the one of the ones that I sent in the email. So this one, probably a lot of you, I guess, would be familiar with this brand. So staples for that one, of course. Now that one is interesting because they're probably using a lot of the different sort of MoGraph, or at least similar to MoGraph tools. This is done by Method Studios, which is a pretty famous, popular VFX studio house. They do a lot of movies as well as commercial work in general, so they could be using any number of tools besides just Cinema 4D for this. They could be using Houdini for, all I know. But just to sort of show you just another way, focusing on one particular brand here. There is a lot going on, but if you're familiar with a lot of the tools that are used in 3D, you can actually do this in a relatively procedural way that makes it pretty a streamlined effect. It's really sort of the idea and the concept and the execution that makes this really as good as it is. So you definitely have access to all the tools in order to create this. Or create something similar to this if you choose to for this assignment. So those are some sort of studio examples that I found. I'll show you a couple of just sort of quick little examples that I've put together that could also totally work for this assignment as well. So I've shown you the Ninja Turtle one before. I'll show you this one here because I can show you some more sort of breakdowns on how this was created as well. But this is a intro that I made a bit ago for a Twitch streamer, just sort of for fun, but it is something that they do use. So I'll play this one for you. So pretty quick, pretty sort of straightforward in sort of what's going on, sort of the drumming, sort of rolling around, laying flat, T-Rex popping out, and then sort of showing the final reveal. So pretty straightforward in terms of the different sort of beats that are in it. But that's something that you sort of need to think about when you're sort of doing this assignment, sort of what are going to be the sort of main parts of your actual sort of animation that you're actually creating. So I've shown some of the other ones there. So what we'll do now is we'll just sort of go through this just so you can see. So up here, right at the beginning here, I have all of the different parts for this actual assignment. So again, like most of the assignments that we've been doing, this will be in 2 parts. So we have a part 1 that will be due next week. And then the second part, which will be the final full project, will be due during our last class. And during our last class is when we will be sort of reviewing everyone's and just sort of showing them off, just so that we can see what everyone's sort of done. And then that'll be sort of the main bulk of our last class. There will be sort of a extra sort of game show type of thing that I have set up for the last class with some prizes, which we will get into a little bit on that in our next class, at least a little bit more detail of what the actual prizes are. But first, before that, you actually have to do the assignment here. So the first part of the assignment will be, of course, developing sort of the main idea, sort of the brand, the storyboard, sort of the outline of what it is, sort of the development of it. And of course, there will be some extra credit that you can do. This will all be towards figuring out what your actual animation will be, which will be, like I said before, between 5 and 15 seconds long. I'm sort of capping it there just so that you don't sort of go sort of overboard in sort of the sort of project. I don't want you to sort of, try to do something so ambitious that it sort of takes longer than you actually have to do. So that's sort of the cap that we have there. And again, most of the stuff from the overall idea is pretty similar to what we've done in most of the brand assignments. So it can be related to some brand in sort of almost sort of any sort of way. It can be a fictional brand. It can be a brand that you've been using this whole sort of semester. So if you want to continue on from your studio project 2 that you did, that's totally acceptable for this project here. So you can see over here, I have sort of a progression workflow or outline for this assignment that you're going to be doing. And we're going to be going into this in more detail, but I wanted to make sure that it's up here right at the beginning so you can see all the different steps that we have here. So we have sort of the brand name, the written outline, the storyboard, the look dev, the animatics from the storyboard, which has the asterisk mark, which means you can or cannot do those for this part, as well as the 3D previs or animatic, also has an asterisk next to it. And then of course there's the final production and the final submission with process if you choose to, and then the screening, which will be the last class, of course. And then after that, you will get your final grade for the whole class and for this assignment in particular. So that's sort of the progression breakdown of this. Again, if anyone has any questions while I go through this, please feel free to throw it in the chat or raise your hand or just yell it out, just so I can make sure that I can get to your questions that you have. So that's the workflow in sort of a really quick sort of encapsulated format here. But let's get into the details on each individual step. Some of these will be pretty clear on what they are, but what I'm going to do here is I have a video that sort of breaks down sort of all the steps that took in sort of that sort of cell phone character animation. So let's check out this video here, and I can definitely play this again if anyone wants to see it another time, 2 times. Sorry about that. So we start with sort of the wrapped video here. And then we sort of go into sort of their storyboard and animatic. So for your assignment that I'm giving you, you do have to do a storyboard, but I'm only asking for 3 frames. So it definitely doesn't have to be as involved as theirs is here. And you can see here that a lot of their sort of drawings here are pretty rough at certain stages. So keep in mind your storyboard does not have to be that sort of crazy at all. It's really just to sort of convey the idea. Now, if you want to go the extra mile and you do want the extra credit, you can build an animatic, which basically just means timing out your frames towards, a timeline, throw it in Premiere or throw it in After Effects and submitting it in video format. So you can do that, and it's a pretty easy way to get some extra credit if you choose to, but you don't have to do that. And then in their one, they actually have a couple different steps in terms of their animation. So they have sort of the layout, the animation pass, and sort of the second animation pass, which is pretty common in terms of 3D workflow. You don't have to do that for your particular assignment here, but I thought it was good just to sort of show you some of the process that normal animation workflows would go for, at least especially more the sort of CG heavy workflows. Motion graphics doesn't always go through this sort of step for every individual part, but it all depends on the project. So they definitely have a couple different animation passes just to sort of get things more refined. And then of course they have the final sort of comping and composition, and some places will have even a couple different steps in the final comp here. So that's sort of a quick sort of overview of sort of the whole process. So let's get into the steps that you actually have. So the steps that you have is obviously figuring out what your brand name actually is. So Nike, Samsung, Sony, Studio Ghibli, Dell, Whole Foods, Cortege Digital, Thrasher. Some of you might recognize some of those brands, or not. But whatever your brand is, just make sure you know what it actually is. So that's obviously key if you're going to be working on any sort of brand project. No, you can choose whatever brand you want. These are just examples that I put up here. So if you already have one that you've done before that you want to do, that's totally cool. Or if you want to pick a new one, that's totally cool as well. Just make sure you're familiar with it. But no, thank you for that question. So next thing that you're going to have to do after you pick whatever your brand is to sort of write an outline. And this is what I'm actually going to ask you to do in class today for any brand that you want. It doesn't have to be your final brand, but just as an example, I just want you to sort of figure out sort of what could potentially be the main sort of story beats of your animation. So I have a couple examples up here, and I'll play some of these while I sort of break them down. So this is a little Lego animation I built. So I made this quite a while ago, but you can see the main ideas that I have here is it fades in the scene from black, the pipe in the bottom part of the body, the Lego swirl around the body, and then Lego Mario is revealed. So I sort of simplified it into those couple steps just from this sort of animation. And it's only about sort of 4 seconds, 5 seconds long. So this is something that if you wanted to do would be something similar that could work. Maybe you could build up whatever your brand actually is. These are just examples, of course. Yours can be totally unique to you. Over here I have this other little example that I've built. So logo builds, animals are making noise, plane bombs the animals, and revealed the final logo. So on this one I have 4 different beats that I'm sort of going through. Now of course each individual of these beats can have multiple parts to them. This is just sort of getting the main idea, because if you look here, the actual logo build is like 4 or 5 steps. Like the monster word comes in, the M drops down, animals comes in, then the egg comes down, then the whole thing pushes together. So there's a couple different steps here that can be part of these individual beats, but this is just sort of getting sort of the essence of your animation. And again, these sort of things can sort of change over time. It doesn't have to sort of be, this sort of linear. It can sort of evolve as you create your elements and create your assets. Maybe you figure out that something would be better if it works this way rather than another way that you had originally thought. So be open to the idea that, things can change during the production of your animation, as they almost undoubtedly will. So I got one more here, and then I'm going to ask you all to sort of give me your thoughts on what the main beats of the sort of Staples animation actually is. So this one right here is a little couple different spots that I did for NBC Connecticut. And here we go again. So a couple different ones in this sort of string out here, but the main idea is the phone animates on, it shows off the weather in the phone, and then you got some lightning to show the NBC logo, and then the end title card with the phone. So, sort of typical of these sort of product sort of animations, they usually end with, some call to action, which on this one is we're trying to get people to download the NBC weather app so that they can get the weather and be aware of NBC's brand, sort of that sort of idea there. So pretty straightforward there when you sort of think about it condensed. Now, of course, there's a bunch of different elements to that. The phone's moving around, there's lightning coming around, text flies in, the animation is moving on the phone itself. So there is, a couple different steps there, but that's sort of the main core of it here. So now what I'm going to ask for anyone to sort of throw in chat, what do you think are the main sort of beats of this sort of Staples animation? So this is the second time we're seeing it, so hopefully you're familiar with it a little bit now. But let me know what you think are sort of the main parts of this animation. So let me know what you think are sort of the main, or what would you consider to be the main parts of this animation. There are a lot of stuff that's going on in here for something that's only about sort of 12 seconds long. But you can see that there's a whole bunch of different elements in here. But what would you consider to be sort of the main, I guess, sort of actionable or main elements of this sort of animation as it goes throughout the timeline here? Close up on the bag, yeah, that's definitely one that they definitely do a lot of work to focus on that. Pan around the bag, close up twirl, rotate, yeah, with the books and the USBs. Yeah, the end card with the staples. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, they definitely make a note to sort of key on their end card here, which they do a nice effect of sort of like a reverse sort of knockout here. Rather than showing the text in white, they show everything else in white and the text is sort of see-through. So it's something to sort of consider, the use of negative space. But yeah, I think those would definitely be considered sort of the main elements of this one. So as long as you can sort of, conceptualize and visualize that in sort of your own sort of animations, hopefully you should be able to sort of get a good idea of what your animation could potentially compose of. And again, this is what I'm going to be asking you to do with any brand for our sort of in-class lesson part here, which you'll have in a little bit. And this will also be what I ask you to submit as part 1 of your sort of assignment as well. So if you do it during class today and this is the brand that you want to do, boom, you already have it done. You'll have 2 out of 3 things, or 2 out of all the things for our first assignment already done. So next up, we have the storyboard, which, like in the other one, storyboard could be really detailed, or it could be really sort of, loose. It could be stick figures. These are just some that I found online that look particularly good. I wish I could do storyboards as good as this, but I definitely cannot. So don't feel like you have to be like a pro drawer in order to have your storyboard. And again, I'm only asking for 3 frames, so these obviously are for like a full sequence of events. Yours can be, beginning, middle, and end for your animation. So that is going to be asked for you. So then what I have here is called sort of look dev or style frames. So these are typically sort of early versions of your design. They don't have to be sort of the final version of it or by far. So here I have just a couple 2 style frames from this sort of animation that I found online. Now, these look really good because this is like a Prime Studio that's sort of doing this. Depending on what you're doing, it could be as simple as a logo in the scene, just with some basic lighting on it. A lot of times, the look dev could be completely done in Photoshop with just sort of the base, object in the scene. So doing the look dev is really just sort of, getting an idea of what the final result might be. It could, easily be just sort of the end title card for your animation, which from what people were picking up before, it could just be, sort of the staples as sort of the final sort of look dev for what you're seeing. Or it could be any individual frame could potentially be sort of the look dev at any stage of your work. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be your final look. Usually the look dev is not what the final looks like, unless you're really, really good. But that's sort of the idea with the look dev / style frames. Now, beyond that, I have 2 other things, which are the animatic from storyboards, which, if you recall, is sort of just putting your storyboard frames in a sequence and timing them out over a timeline. So relatively straightforward with that, assuming that you have your storyboard frames created. But if you want to go a little bit above that, you can create sort of what's called a 3D previs or animatic. And this, is a common term in terms of movies in the VFX world, but really it just means it's an early version of your sort of project, your animation, before you figure out what everything's going to look like. So here I'll show you some little planning parts that I put together of my monsters versus animals sort of animation. So you can see here that I'm just using spears for prevising the objects. Nothing fancy, even the little tank there is like, cylinders, all primitive objects here. It's just sort of to get the idea of the actual animation. And it didn't, it doesn't mean that this is going to be the final result. It just means that this is, what I'm thinking of doing. Again, this is a part that is extra, so you don't have to do this, but it's a good thing to be familiar with because in the industry it's done a lot in terms of planning, because this is sort of how you might sell a producer or a client on actually taking on a project, showing that you have an idea of what you're actually trying to do. So this is just another version. Again, basic spears, basic objects here, and depending on how you do your previs, it almost might be good enough to actually be usable in your actual animation, and you can just sort of swap and replace items. So keep that in mind, that this is all building up towards your final animation. So then, so there's different ways that you can go about it. I will show in class, which I think a lot of you are already familiar with this, how to actually sort of render out sort of the previs for your outside of Cinema 4D. I will show you some extra techniques that you can keep in mind that might help you speed up this process. But yeah, so all of this above here, excluding the star items, because those are extra credit if you wish to do it, will be due next week. So that is December 9th, assuming I got my dates correctly, and I do. So these is what will be asked for you to have next week. So basically just sort of planning out your animation and having the general idea. Now, of course, it can change as you actually, do the animation and figure out things. But this will at least show me and vis-a-vis sort of the client that you actually know what you're doing, and that, it's worth them sort of investing their money in you. So that's what's going to be due next week. And then after that will be, of course, the final production. So, for the last class, hopefully you'll have your final video, you'll have it rendered before class starts so that we can actually show them during class. So that'll be sort of the main part there. So I don't need to see, sort of like the different animation steps, although while you're working on the project, if you do want to share, any sort of progress that you're making or have any questions, of course, feel free to ask me. But you won't be required to do that while you're in production. I'd rather you, focus on it. And if you do have any questions, then feel free to reach out to me. Now, the only other thing that we have here at the end part here is going to be sort of, if you want to do sort of extra sort of submissions, you can submit the process that you went through creating your project. So if we look up at here for the final submission, of course, it's the final video. But in terms of the extra credit for the final submission, you can actually submit any of the sort of process elements that you've created on your project. So like I showed before, this one was a full video on your sort of process of how they created the animation. So if you want to go that crazy, you could do that. But any sort of element that you use to sort of create your project can be submitted as extra credits. So any of your style frames, any of your storyboard animatics, you could also do a write-up of your final sort of animation. So sometimes what I like to do is just sort of do sort of a recap post. It could be on social media, it could be on Medium. I'm sure you've seen them around where people just sort of, explain how they created the project that they created. So if you want to submit that for extra credit, that is something that you can do. So any sort of breakdown process can totally work in terms of submitting for extra credit for the final project, which if you've done any of the sort of pre-planning stuff, hopefully a lot of you already have that. So you can see here, someone put together a little GIF of the different steps in terms of creating their sort of final animation. So it doesn't have to be as involved as that, but something similar to that would also be acceptable. And then of course the screening and then your final grade is the end part of this process. So that's sort of the big breakdown on your sort of final project here. So again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask me them during class, or if you want to ask them via email directly, that's totally cool as well. But I'd rather you have your questions answered than not if you're wondering about any part of this process. The final product will of course be due on the last class if that wasn't super clear before. So what we're going to do now, since I've been talking for a little bit here, is we're going to take a little break. But what I want you to do during this break is on the in-class workboard, like we've done before, I would like you to basically post an image or a reference material for a possible brand. You only have to do one for this assignment here, and then just write 3 bullet point outlines, or just 3 lines. It doesn't have to be bullet points if you don't know how to do that via their system here, but just put 3 bullet points of a possible animation. So it can be the beginning, the middle, and the end. So you could be logo comes in, logo does a funny dance, logo holds on screen. It could be anything like that, or it could be your character is going to fly around and do a whole bunch of things in relation to the brand. So it could really be up to you. It doesn't have to be your final brand if you don't want it to be. It's totally up to you if you want it to be your final brand. If it is, then that's totally cool, and it means that you got the first two parts of your homework already done.